it's good for the scene. I think
That's the
ultimately it's good
but.
for the
That's
scene.
the but. The good for the scene. Shroud is good,
Yeah.
but this, but that. Is he the savior of the
Yeah,
Sentinels or
yeah.
not, Tanner? Are they going deep in the LCQ? Are they going to champions?
Okay, you know what? Listen, I think
Let's get right into it. And before we actually get into the first topic, of course, the third week in a row where we actually have some great support from Twitch. So a big thanks to Twitch to help us make the show possible. And you know what? This is actually the first time that we're live with a sponsorship from Twitch, and we actually didn't crash from the get-go. So knock on wood, things have been going well. Let's get into the first topic right now. And we're going to start off hot, as we just mentioned before. We're going to talk about Sentinels, of course. We got to get the clout. We got to talk about Shroud. So Shroud, we've already seen him play towards the LCQ for the last weekend for 2 matches so far. And my question to start things off with you, Tanner, is Shroud the savior for Sentinels, the savior for NA, or is it just a marketing scheme?
you know, I think it could be both. I honestly think it could be both. In the first matchup with the guard, I didn't really know what to expect. You know, the guard looked kind of shaky, so I didn't know after seeing this one, what type of Sentinels and Shroud we were seeing, right? If it's two watered down teams and the matches are super close, what does that mean? But what I did think in this first matchup was that Shroud looked kind of like the little brother trying to hang out with all the big brothers. Rightfully so, because he's been out the game. But I think Shroud ultimately is scaling, is what I think is happening.
Yeah. And for you, Gio, I mean, Shroud is a person that comes from Counter-Strike. I know you maybe you haven't been involved in Counter-Strike too much, but it's been a name that's really prominent within the scene for the attack FPS or just Twitch in general. So when you hear about this person, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Honestly, I mostly know him as a Twitch streamer, but someone who I've actually never watched because I don't really watch Twitch streamers. So I was like, when everyone lost their mind over the fact that Shroud was joining Sentinels, I was kind of there like, oh, that's one of those like people, right? I think the thing is if you take away the name Shroud and it's just a player who has professional experience joining a team, then like what you're looking at with these statistics and everything aren't really mind blowing. You know, it's like what Tanner just said about him looking like the little brother trying to play with the big brothers. That's not that crazy. He's just come in and this is his first kind of professional experience in Valorant with a proper team in like a high level official. It's actually not, you know, just because his name is Shroud and he's famous and he has a check mark doesn't really change much about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that too. But at the same time, like we saw the results from that first game to the second game versus Shopify Rebellion, where it actually did look like the Shroud from like the 2015 Counter-Strike in Cloud9 that he was known for. And naturally, lots of eyes were on Shroud, were on Sentinels. And naturally, a lot of comments came out of the first series when it was Shroud technically supposed to be the one that was the only one planning for the team on Icebox. But I think Shazam has better things to say about this player, about Shroud. So let's listen in and see what he has to say.
And then Shroud is one of the most disciplined players, honestly, like that we've had on this team. He plays the controller role very well. He has incredible comms, and like when rounds break down, he's not scared to take over and start mid rounding. So it's good.
That's it. That's experience coming in from Shroud too. And actually, for me, has been one of the biggest surprises for LCQ in North America, not only from his skill, but like his interviews. Post matches with Bach, for example, on the VCT desk was actually quite amazing because he looks well spoken, he's comfortable in front of the camera, and that's not what Shroud used to be when he was a competitive player in Cloud9 before. So it's really nice, a really good breath of fresh air that we actually have in the scene so far. And we see this little snippet about Shroud of why and how he joined Sentinels. And you know what? It seems as at most that he was like just throwing out the window. Oh, you know, it looks like they needed a fifth. I just applied. And it just looked like I was able to join the team. And it almost brings back to that storyline with Raucus, for example, Tanner, where when we asked a question to like Zoms and the rest of Sentinels, like, hey, how come Raucus joined Sentinels after he got dropped by FaZe? And then naturally, somehow it's just like, oh, I had a conversation with Zoms, and then boom, I'm part of the team, and I'm signed like 2 weeks later for Champions.
Yeah, I wonder if it's one of those things too, because I think there was a lot of pride in Sentinels and probably Shazam specifically for kind of just being the guy. All last year, Shazam was kind of like extra man and extra brain, extra everything, and was getting a lot of love for it. So I'm wondering if at some point there was kind of a step back from the pride and from, I guess, the love that he was getting from that.
Mhm.
And, you know, in having these conversations, just in passing, if that was enough to be like, you know what, maybe we do try and find an analyst, a coach, or something like that. Maybe we do start to kind of outsource for the most part. I do want to highlight though that in the second series for Shroud, 38% headshot percentage. That right there is like, again, I think Shroud is only going to be scaling. Their next matchup against 100 Thieves is obviously going to be probably, if not the largest test we see from them. I don't know, but it's good for the scene. I think
That's the
ultimately it's good
but.
for the
That's
scene.
the but. The good for the scene. Shroud is good,
Yeah.
but this, but that. Is he the savior of the
Yeah,
Sentinels or
yeah.
not, Tanner? Are they going deep in the LCQ? Are they going to champions?
Okay, you know what? Listen, I think he's in a little too deep. I think the water is a little too warm. Although he had a good performance against Shopify, they are the dark horse. You're supposed to have a good performance against Shopify. So unfortunately, I think they are hitting a wall against 100 Thieves.
All right. Well, at least we heard it here from Tanner. We're putting Shroud and Sentinels on the spot. And speaking about hot topics,
man, don't do me like that, man. You'll just out me. We gotta just go past it.
Tanner, welcome back to Valoranting. But anything else that actually makes it hot water? You talked about hot water maybe in the position right now for Sentinels with Shroud. There's another agent that actually puts, makes the water hot. That's with Hot Hands. That's Phoenix. So Phoenix was actually played over the past weekend during the LCQ. Most recently, I think it was today or yesterday with Liquid, and also, of course, from Boostio over at EG. So I want to know your thoughts, Gio, as we talk about the Phoenix. So there's been some changes that's been going on within the last patch. The updates is actually being used for Phoenix on this in this LCQ. Do you think the changes for Phoenix are good enough for Phoenix higher pick rate?
Well, I think we can kind of look at the evidence here and say clearly yes to some extent. Otherwise, he wouldn't be being used. And one thing that I've become a really big proponent of, basically since the kind of, I suppose the beginning of the year when we started to see trends come in one team playing an agent a certain way. The one I always cite is Cloud9 playing KO, the way that they did at Champions, and then OpTic with the way that they play Neon. It always kinds of sets trends, and you seem to notice now that teams that are willing to try new ways of playing agents and willing to actually innovate and not necessarily stick to what has been the meta for some time are usually the ones to actually see some success. So I'm actually quite fond of the fact that there are teams who have looked at these changes in Phoenix and they've said, okay, well, we're actually going to try and use this now, come up with something new that our opponents are maybe not necessarily expecting. And even if it isn't perfect straight away, and let's say a month down the line, there is a kind of new accepted meta way of playing Phoenix, this might not be that, but it is the beginnings of that. And I think usually innovation, when there are positive changes to some agent, is quite a good sign for teams.
Yeah, even when you're looking at this matchup on Ascent, so that's the map that Phoenix was picked out. Was picked for this map, sorry, is that we've seen this before in the past, Tanner, where Phoenix was actually very prominent on this map. I'm thinking of players like Mata, I'm thinking of players like Asuna, of course, Drone when it was still playing TSM on this map. It was just like, hey, let's play some heavy A mains, some heavy B mains with the curveballs. But this time we were able to add a little bit more with combinations from the Fade. But do you think, Tanner, in your eyes, this has become like a one-trick kind of thing where you might expect it now that Phoenix is going to be on this map? Or can he bring something different on a map like Ascent where you could go deeper than just having to play aggressive extremities on defense?
Yeah, so I'm also going to throw Sick into that, the kind of the pile of names there, because Sick also played the Phoenix on Ascent a lot. To answer your question, for the rest of LCQ, I don't know how much Phoenix. I think we actually probably don't see any more Phoenix for the most part. But fortunately, Evil Geniuses have a lot of time to try and figure out whether or not the Phoenix is going to work, because they've been toasted. I think that the Phoenix is not necessarily a great pick right now, especially bringing in an LCQ. I think that's super scary. You don't have a whole lot of time to do it. But what I do think is happening is we're starting to see more agents be implemented into the game, like the Fade, and that alone is kind of like a shoulder-to-shoulder buff to the agents like Phoenix. I think Mimi was tweeting about the instead of throwing the Seize nade, now you can seize Hot Hands, and you can do stuff like that where you're having that Phoenix run it back right behind the Prowler, or the Phoenix run it back working as utility that is going to not only draw attention into A main, but now that Haunt is going up and nobody's paying attention to that bit. So I'm not sold on the Phoenix. But I do think that we are starting to see as more agents get, involved in Valorant or more are released, we can see some of these agents that have, fallen by the wayside
Mhm.
slowly start to come back in.
Yeah, and the good thing too with Phoenix is kind of like when you have one of those duelists that are able to that's able to find information, right? Just like
Yeah.
Race, for example, with the boom bot is going to help you find information, and because the running back is only 6 orbs, and you're also able to get your armor back when you're popped from the running back, it's still a good way to scout. So with
Mhm.
those in mind, do you want to see more Phoenix going into the later matches for LCQ or just in the meta of Valorant? If you want to start theory crafting here, Gia.
I don't know if I necessarily want to see more Phoenix, but I wouldn't be against it, if that makes sense. You know, I'm not like specifically rooting for there to be more of him. I think that kind of the point that Tanner was making, where especially you can combine him with the Fade and use that really for a lot of fact finding. I think that if you can lean into this idea of sort of duoing him up with some kind of support, then maybe you can get a lot more complex ideas actually done with him. Because I think when you think back to Phoenix, how he used to be played, he was really one of these like solo duelists who could kind of go and look after himself. That's the point of him having the ability to heal himself, the way that his curveballs worked. You know, you can kind of flash for yourself. Whereas now, actually combining that with more of a big part of an engagement where you're actually using it alongside others, then yeah, I think maybe you can have some safer and less risky ways of playing Phoenix that actually bring about a larger return on investment in what it is you use. But I don't think that necessarily means that he is going to be like a bona fide replacement for other duelists, for example, a Jet or whatever in your engagements.
Yeah, and you know what? At least when you had the Phoenix come out on Ascent, we were engaged watching these games, right? Because oh shit, Phoenix is making a comeback. There's updates in here or not, but here's another topic that allows you or that talks about the engagement is actually again about Sentinels, where they almost broke record viewership once again. At least they did for North America. It's probably like one of the most viewed matches outside of the Masters, as you could see here from the screenshot. Over 600,000 people have tuned in to the Sentinels versus the Guard game, the debut of Shroud basically into this roster. And when you're looking at Masters 2 Copenhagen that just happened, that's just over this graphic, it shows that it's the numbers coming in from the grand finals of FPX versus PRX at Masters Copenhagen on LAN with a crowd, first international event, while you have an online game that almost matches up to that. So, Tanner, my question to you is: Are we going to start? Are we scared of the viewership and the engagement of the community in Valorant competitive so far?
No, I think it's great, right? I think Valorant is supposed to be the next big esport, and it might take a little bump from somebody who's got a lot of clout behind him to do it. Also, mind you, I'm pretty sure that was on a Thursday, right? That we got that matchup. So who knows? Maybe if it was a Saturday, I'm not going to get into it. But no, I think it's great. I think, like I said, Valorant's supposed to be the next big thing, and it's kind of starting to get there. And I think with that, too, what do we just saw Stewie kind of walking away from and wanting to be a content creator. That
Yeah.
itch is always going to come back. We're seeing it with Shroud, and I think more big names are going to want to get into the biggest esport that is going to be out there. So I think the numbers, it's a draw for everybody, for fans, for organizations, for players who might be elsewhere to move on over to Valorant.
Yeah, and it seems that we're switching over to like almost like a meta viewership. And Gio, it seems like you were going to say something here, so I'm gonna just let you take the bite.
I was just going to say, I think that a non-Masters game reaching Masters level viewership is not concerning just because the viewerships of the two things become the same. I'd be concerned if the Masters level games were getting terrible viewership, but they're not. It's the other way around. So we should be celebrating the fact that this non-Masters game did awesomely and not worrying about the fact that it was like, oh, it's catching up to Masters. Who cares? Who cares? That's a good thing. Bring in the viewers. That's awesome.
Do you guys actually? Well, we'll talk about it another time. But I feel like what happens if Shroud actually didn't play for that Sentinels game, but it was still a Sentinels matchup
Like
versus
3
the
people
Guard
would
as
have
the
watched.
first game, right? Yeah, the numbers maybe wouldn't be as high, but at least like even watch parties like Tarek had like 150,000 viewers just themselves. So that's pretty cool to see how that's moving forward. So big shout out to Tarek to be one of the main watch parties for the VCTs. And this allows me to give another shout out here over to Juke.gg, who's another sponsor of our event or our show for today. Of course, we've been shouting out for the past few weeks, but this time they have something new hot off the press on the table for you all to enjoy. And make sure you download the application on your Android or your Apple phone, because they actually now are trying out a beta version of a live chat experience so that everybody could hop in as a group and talk about the VCTs. You could connect with like-minded fans to talk about the meta, talk about the games, and discuss everything without the whole chaos of like all the emotes. And the lol caster said brim stammy instead of a brim stimmy in Twitch chat, and you could actually have regular and adult conversations about the players and about these teams. And they're actually really open-minded. Of course, it's Juke.gg that runs an application and a website and a platform for the community. So they want you to try it out throughout the rest of the VCTs, whether it's North America, South America, or even Europe or around the world, so that if you have any feedback to give to them, they'll make sure that they do the updates and make sure you have a continuous good experience with the chat program that they currently are testing out here for Juke.gg. So big thank you to Juke. Moving on now, we actually are going to move to roster updates. The most recent roster update is not only on players only, but for organizations. So as you see this tweet longer from Nats, it's an official statement talking about Masters 3 champions that are now officially free agents. And they went through roster changes, dropping Defo and picking up JD and Purpo, and are currently looking for a team to represent them. And they're currently playing in the LCQ in EMEA, still battling it through, still alive. So your thoughts here, Gio, on any of these topics. So who do you think is going to be the organization that could pick up M3C?
Well, so here's my fear about this is if you imagine an organization that's not already in Valorant and they want to pick up this team, it's already too late to apply for a partnership with Riot. And that's where my fear about it comes in, because that means that really M3C, who are a tier 1 team, they're a Masters champion, they're a very good team, in order to be in the running to actually end up in the, pseudo franchise league next year, a team who already owns a team and is already applying for the partnership would have to drop their entire team if they're going to do that. And it makes me wonder if this team is going to end up getting picked apart as orgs decide to pick individual players to go to their teams, because that's actually the only way that they can sort of keep their current rosters and take some of these players who are really valuable. It makes me wonder if it's just going to end up being kind of the end of the era for Mech, because I really don't, unless they go into tier 2, I really, really don't know what the options outside of that are.
Yeah, because there's probably like VRLs and there's probably like the tier 3 orgs are going up as well. So Tanner, you got something to add on to this topic as well?
I think to that point though, I'm not too sure what it's looking like for the definitely not franchising on the EMEA side of things, but I know that for North America, we have teams like the TSMs that are still in talks and still in questions. And I mean, quite frankly, TSM has been a stinker org for quite some time in Valorant. Yeah, they have been asked. So again, now to take that correlation and go over to EMEA, I think there's a world where maybe one of these teams that does make it into the partnership program then kind of just drops all of their players and looks to pick up something else, because that's what TSM's going to have to do if they want to compete against the Exits, the OpTics, those roster changes will have to be made.
I don't even know if they are applying for the partnership program, but I suppose you could look at teams like, or orgs like XL who have an LEC slot. Like that would probably be where I would think, because XL do have a team in the VRLs. And as I say, I don't know if they're applying for partnership. I don't know if they would want to drop their roster. They're a British organization. Like, are they going to want to pick up all of these CIS players? I don't really know how that would work. But I think my mind would maybe go to organizations who own an LEC slot, like are going to probably be the most likely to have their interest piqued by buying or trying to get a Valorant slot, even if they don't have a top team right now, I guess.
And since you were able to actually cover a little bit of M3C over last year at Masters Reykjavik and whatnot, what are your thoughts as well on the changes in the roster from Purpo and JD joining the team? Are they going to be the difference maker that's going to help Mech qualify to champions here, Gio?
Vans, I wasn't actually at Masters Reykjavik. I was at Masters Berlin.
Sorry, what are the Masters?
I mean, I'll forgive you. I mean,
One that they won.
I think that yes, the one that they won. I think that Mecca may be one of these teams that I've kind of warmed to the idea of them making roster change in the same way that I was very vocal about this happening with Sentinels for quite some time. I think that when a team starts to have some stale performances, and I want to be very careful how I put this because Mech have not performed badly, but they have not performed well enough. But they have had a roster which has been together for a long time, and they have basically reached the very top with that roster, and then that roster as a unit has stopped being good enough. I'm usually a proponent of there being some kind of roster change at some point in that. Now, the nice thing about JD is obviously JD is, come from Ninjas in Pajamas and NIP and Na'Vi. So also been playing in a CIS team. So it's not like they've had to reach really far to some. I know that CIS players usually like to stay amongst themselves. I don't really know much about Purpo, to be honest with you, but I think that just having that change, moving Defo on, and having just some change in the kind of environment and in that dynamic could be a really big, point for them.
Yeah. And Tanner, do you think this is going to be the make it or break it? Because you're going to be the one that I'm going to be like just asking every single time, are they qualifying or not? And you tell me a big yes or no.
I say no. I say if you're going to bring in a brand new player, you can't expect anything because you have to not only work this person into your roster and just make it kind of fit, but also I think we just saw JD's first ever, I want to say Fade and Sky for Mech and in officials. It just, if you have a new player, try and put them on something they're a bit more comfortable on, not something that they're not, to have a kind of terrible performance. So, no, unfortunately, I think JD needs more time.
Yeah, and JD for me was a person that actually was playing a lot of Sage when I was first watching him play too, over in the Na'Vi days or whatnot. But you have to figure out some of the roles. It's kind of like the Shroud thing when you're playing your first match of playing controller, you're not putting the frags in, but watch him just drop huge numbers against Oglu in the other semis for the upper bracket. But let's move over to the pond, over to North America. Over the past weekends, there was actually more Valorant happening outside of VCTs. We actually did have more towards the female scene. We had the Astral Clash organized by Gen G. This is actually a pretty cool 1/2D event where you had some of the biggest names in Game Changers in North America that qualified and that played, because you have to go through an online qualifier to play this. And to summarize it here, we have Evil Geniuses that actually won the event. And Evil Geniuses used to be Team Dignitas, just to give you a little bit of an update, on their roster changes, because Dignitas, unfortunately, has let go of a lot of teams and people within their staff most recently. But Evil Geniuses playing against Misfit, surprisingly enough, in the grand finals, and not a team like, for example, Shopify Rebellion, who fell in third. So, Tanner, you actually hung out at this event. You drove all the way from Phoenix to LA to hang out. So, what was that event like for you?
Yeah, so for me personally, the event was super cool. Meeting all the players. I've worked with the Game Changer scene since kind of the inception. Game Changers won back in 2021. So it was really nice to see, put a lot of, everybody's got an anime profile picture. So to put faces to names, but to also see these players actually get the chance to compete on LAN. I think this event alone in itself, as if, Game Changers with Riot Games wasn't enough, it legitimizes this in orgs wanting to put money into this and get the teams out there. And again, just the legitimacy of the whole entire tournament to bring 8 teams out to a LAN. It stinks that it was only one day. It stinks because the venue was very hot and people were sweaty. And it stinks that the only food was Mr. Beast Burger. But other than that, I think with a bit more planning going into the next one, I think it'll be just as electric. The atmosphere was really cool. And then again, on a personal level, I had a blast with the players, the coaches. I got to meet Sapphire, who, is observing all of the events that matter, in the VCTs and stuff. So making those connections, I think for the players also meant a lot.
Yeah. I think that's pretty cool too, where even in North America, the tier 2 scene was like looking at NSG lands, for example, but it didn't have like the huge crowd of people hanging out and stuff like that too. So it was nice to see for Astral Clash, and I'm hoping to see more of that in terms of lands and tournaments in North America for the supporting the tier 2, tier 3 scene, or any other divisions looking at Valorant. And now let's go back into Europe, where we actually have some most recent announcements with Team Liquid, and who are still also within the EMEA. with the LCQ. So unfortunately here, it's now official that Team Liquid has parted ways with Sliggy. Sliggy originally has left the team alongside Link because they had differences in views and the direction of where we wanted to go with Team Liquid so far. So most recently, they picked up Emil as a coach. It's not Doom Bros, by the way, chat. It is his twin brother, formerly the head coach of Guild X. And Guild X actually most recently has been pretty much at the top of the chain for game changers over in Europe, always getting like second and third place behind G2 Gozin. So let's start off with that conversation. Emil as a coach, what does he bring that's different than Sliggy and Liquid? How do they look so far? And I'll push that question over to you here, Gio.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know Emil from Overwatch. Emil was a flex tank player back in mostly played in Overwatch Contenders. I think he was on Angry Titans, but you know, this is memory of a few years, like trying to remember. And so that's mostly what I can base my opinion of him on. And I think the interesting thing about the role that he played in Overwatch is it is a role that requires you to have quite a holistic view of what is going on. And Overwatch is obviously a very chaotic game because being a flex tank, you're going to be playing frontline and backline at a moment's notice. And so I think that that kind of sets you up pretty well to be having a like a really good kind of coaching mind. Clearly there is, you know, given the reasons for Sliggy leaving the organization and this difference in opinion, whatever that difference in opinion is must be something that Emil actually fits a lot more in with the organization. So it makes me wonder if we're just going to be seeing quite a, I don't want to say profound change in the way that the team plays, but there has to be some fundamental way that things are going to change. And that's something I'm very curious of as somebody who has been incredibly critical of Team Liquid over time. I mean, I'm actually quite a big fan of Sliggy. I think he's a really intelligent coach. But I think that Team Liquid have been a strange team where they've had like a lot of people who have overlapping roles and they are trying to take on the roles that you have to play in the game. Whereas if you maybe took them all as individuals, you'd maybe put them all on the same role, if that makes sense. And so I think I'm mostly curious to see how the jobs and the roles within the team are going to be divvied out and those responsibilities. And I think that's going to be the most important thing that that Emil's going to have to really nail with them, because I just think that's tripped Team Liquid up like kind of time and time again.
I agree with you. The mix up of roles, but also the mix up of who the hell is IGLing for this team.
Oh,
going from like
too.
not having one to then Yampi, and now officially it's back on Scream. And then most critically, we're saying, oh well, if Scream's gonna be fragging, well maybe he's not gonna be able to, or sorry, IGLing, he's not gonna be able to frag as much. So they had to bring in a new fifth player, and I thought the fifth player was gonna be an IGL, but they actually bring in Dimasic. So Dimasic most recently has played for FPX and also known as a short stint with NIP. Has this actually been the winning solution and the winning missing piece actually for Team Liquid to have a strong run so far in the LCQ to try to qualify for Champion Center?
Yeah, you know, I think it just goes back to the same old, same old. We're getting the highlight here of Dimasic being able to play the Sage, an agent that they are very comfortable on, and that is cool. I love that. If you can bring somebody who obviously has competitive experience, right, isn't transferring games like we've seen, isn't the Shroud where you kind of have to put them on controller, you put them on, you slot them into a role where they would normally play. But I think also in this series, they had Dimasic on the Omen, and it's like first time Omen and officials, and it just looks awkward. It really seems like the teams, Team Liquid here in this one specifically, are kind of scrambling to just find a player, put them in, say, hey, you're good. And then at that point, you kind of just have to hope for the best. So it's just one of those things. I think, again, they need time, but I would love to see teams look a little bit more directly at, can we get a 1-for-1? So at the very least, they're comfortable on their agents and they're not working on both agent and fitting in with the team.
Yeah.
I do wonder, you know, especially with some of the things that we saw at Masters and also with the chamber nerfs upcoming, if Cypher is going to make his way back in the meta, maybe that's something that Dimasic's going to become really useful for, because that's basically all he played on FPX. Yes, he played Sage, but for a long time he was just the Cypher guy. And I do wonder if that's something that he would be able to kind of come in and be like, haha, my time is now, you know, like with, I guess it depends on how the meta is really going to change, but I think we've seen hints that Cypher is probably going to come back to some extent.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great point too, because if we do have the chamber nerfs and then Yampi, for example, is not going to play chamber, then MSX could definitely do that. And maybe they're just thinking that far ahead. I mean, there's a lot of players and a lot of people in the community that think that Team Liquid are going to make it to the grand finals at least. And Sliggy is actually one of them. So still, no bad blood between Sliggy and Team Liquid. Still a great, strong support of the team and that roster. So where I'm excited to see what's going to happen. I mean, they just beat BBL. They're continuing into the upper bracket. So we'll keep an eye out within the VCTs. And speaking of VCTs for the last dance qualifier, we're going to do like just a skip through or a skim through every single region so far, because as you know, there's only 24 hours in a day, and I can only watch so many hours of Valorant within a day while still trying to stay sane. So to summarize real quick into the LCQ and APAC, Boom Esports. So for the first time in Valorant history, we're going to have an Indonesia team going into champions. And that's actually quite fucking awesome to see, because you had favorites, for example, like Team Secret or like Bleed Esports that were supposed to qualify at least to the grand finals. And it was most likely going to be one of those two teams that was going to qualify for champions. But you had an all Indonesian grand finals between OpTic G and also Boom Esports. And the heartbreaking part of it too is OpTic G losing in the grand finals. One of the players actually had to skip through like offers from PRX and offers from, I think, even Team Secret when they qualified for LAN before. So that kind of sucks to see, and it's heartbreaking. But Tanner, I think you kept a close eye on South America so far.
Yes, so South America, I have the honor of working and casting alongside the #1 South America stand-in Dryad. So she kind of hooked me up here for this one. And this bracket that we have here, it isn't quite flushed out. You would see Furia moving on and Crew moving on as they took down Nines and Keith Stars respectively. That, I think, is one of the most anticipated matchups. Furia, I believe, just had some changes with their roster. And then Crew are facing this crazy kind of community pressure as a team. And I think they said it themselves that they are feeling that pressure a little bit. So although they looked good against the Keed Stars, they beat them 2-0, kind of close matchups. I think they have their largest, I guess, feat ahead of them in this Furia squad that looks like the #1.
And I think, maybe last but not least, East Asia, and which has been a region that has been fascinating a lot of people. Once again, this bracket is not fully fleshed out, so if you want to look at that match 08, I think that is, the other upper bracket match, that would be Crazy Raccoon versus Northeption. And then down in your last lower round matchup, that's going to be Damwon versus Cone. And I think the really interesting thing here is none of the full Korean teams are in the upper bracket anymore. Actually, we have a lot of these mixed teams. And so interestingly, we have full Chinese teams, which means that if we have someone like Edward Gaming, who, I mean, if you're a League of Legends fan, you're going to be very familiar with that organization as it is. But a team like Edward Gaming, if they get all the way to the grand finals in an upper bracket run, we could see our very first Chinese team making it to champions, which I think in and of itself would be so fascinating, because we as a community have learned to really love like the Southeast Asian region, and like the Latin American region, and these regions that were previously understated. And this would be a new region that we actually don't know a ton about.
Yeah, that's I actually have to put it out there as well, though, that I actually stayed up to watch that hype of EDG versus Onslayers, and I thought it was going to be a fucking amazing match. It was a fucking waste of time. So don't stay up to watch East Asian qualifiers until you actually get later into the brackets, chat. That said, let's summarize what's going on as well for EMEA. We talked a little bit about Liquid that made it forward, as well as Mech. Of course, the bracket is not updated yet because it's live right now. So Team Liquid and also Na'Vi have won their matches into that quarterfinals upper. And G2 just beat Ascent in the lower bracket round #1. So unfortunately, the first team eliminated is Ascent, who recently just picked up Blink. And on the other end, the other lower bracket matchup is currently 1-0 in the series between Guild Esports and BBL. So pretty crazy that other favorites such as BBL and Guild Esports are meeting up face-to-face into the lower bracket round #1 for the lower bracket run to try to qualify for Masters. So make sure you just keep one window open on twitch.tv/Valorant, because that's all of the matches. It's basically happening around the clock. You got all of the regions happening. When one is done, the other one starts. so you're not going to miss on anything. But after looking at or summarizing all of these brackets, was there any of these matches here that surprised you, Tanner, looking at the results at least?
So I was looking again directly at the South Americas, and I think that matchup that I talked about, Furia versus Crew, just because of obviously Crew being a worldwide favorite now at this point from what they've been able to do in the international tournaments. I think that's one of the matchups that you need to be watching. And if you're a super fan of the Latin Americas, Valorant _ LA for Latin America, there's matches going on right now, and it's kind of the widely understood number 2 for these regions in the LCQ and Fusion. They're playing in the lower bracket, and they've got a player out because they're sick and their coach is filling in. So yeah, South America, I think a lot of people should be keeping their eyes on that just to see if, Vamos Crew makes it through again.
Yeah, and if Crew will continue to have like the wins over the Brazilian team. Sorry, Gio, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think for me, it has to be looking over in the North American LCQ, and this is a happy surprise, but it's seeing the Guard do as well as they're doing, because I think after stage 2, where things looked like they were crumbling a little, you kind of wondered, okay, did they just have their really good like inception into the scene, and then they've just been humbled a bit? And actually, you can tell they've gone away, they've done whatever it is they need to do, and they're having a really good upper bracket run so far. I'm very interested to see if they are going to make it to the grand finals via the upper bracket when they get to their game versus FaZe. But I think that's just a really positive, kind of surprise that's come out of the LCQ in North America.
Yeah, I agree. Even for me, the Guard, it's like, always one of those comfort picks when I was watching and even casting that game. But we'll have a chance to dig a little bit deeper within the LCQ when we're going to have Anderson coming on as a guest for today's show, and we'll look at every single match and see what he has to say about the agent compositions coming out from the Guard or their performance as a whole. So let's take over with the news, the roster changes, and maybe even roster updates in terms of staff, because we do have OpTic Gaming and also FNATIC currently looking for analyst positions. And I found that this was actually quite interesting how they were looking for these analysts, because both of them actually just tweeted out on Twitter, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that, you need to have this, you need to have that, and good luck, have fun in your inboxes and your DMs when you're posting that Mini in chat. I'm pretty sure they got flooded with trolls and whatnot. I'm pretty sure Mini had some fun with that as well. In terms of like, here are some of the random emails that I've gotten. Maybe I shouldn't have put it out, but my question to you guys, starting off with you here, Gio, is why do you think these two teams, these two organizations, are currently looking for analysts so late within the year when, they maybe could have picked them up during Masters 2, for example?
No, I think this is pretty simple. I think that both of these teams underperformed compared to their own expectations at Masters, and they've come back and they're like, well, shit. Because the problem is when you've got domestic stuff, which both of these teams have absolutely slayed at, you only need to be able to anti-strat a certain amount of stuff, and that's because a lot of people in your region are going to play very similarly. But it always comes to be at international is when it's really hard. And the amount of work that is going to be required of the support staff to be able to do that anti-stratting in pretty unforgiving periods of time for things like that, that's only going to get harder as the way you play gets more complex and teams get better. And I think both of these teams are like, right, if we allow ourselves to slip now, we are going to be overtaken and we will lose those glory days of being really good. We didn't get as far as we thought we would. We didn't get as far as we wanted to at Masters. We need to make sure we are picking up those pieces now and ensure that we have enough of a workforce behind us so that we are not missing anything. I don't think it's a case of like, they could have done it before Masters. They probably thought they had enough resources before Masters and their expectations were set accordingly, and those expectations were dashed. So they're fixing it.
And I want to jump on quickly, just to caveat, right? When we see the domestic stuff, it's usually week after week, and you have time to prep. We heard Doom Bros talk about the last time I was actually on the episode, say, damn, man, this is tough. We just saw a team in PRX who was impossible almost to anti-strat, or felt like impossible to anti-strat because you only have one day to do so. So there's definitely just workload that needs to be spread out for the most part.
Yeah, so that's going to be very interesting. Good luck and have fun as well. You were talking about it, Gio, where they're looking for maybe ways to anti-strat outside the region, which is why one of the topics coming out there from Chet's questions actually is why did we lose to a certain team like FPX on Split how do we anti-strike loud on Ascent, right? So really fun. Looking forward to see who's going to come out of it from the analyst position. But now let's move on over to, a topic that's as old as time that's going to resurface from time to time as well, from event to event, especially when there's 600,000 people that are watching the game. Then there's naturally going to be some eyes of like, okay, well, you got some for the community, but this time it's back from the players. So our buddy Mike Dapper is tweeting out, listening to casters criticize players on the way that they play is making my body cringe. So I'm paraphrasing on the way that they play, but it's on the decision making. And then we had a couple of replies going on for it as well, such as Steel replying, "Hey, I don't think Chamber should have picked that. Is this Chamber anchor?" And it's that's the point of Chamber. You're looking for these aggressive picks. I get the point of view from there. So Steel also memed out, give me some examples or whatnot. And then you have somebody going into Tyra's chat. I think I kind of know this guy, and I think a lot of people know him as well.
Yeah.
Underrated player, but most recently won a major and also got a lot of MVPs in a lot of his events that he played. But Simple saying, you need to explain these players in Valorant to stop fucking over peaking. They play so stupid right now. And literally, as he said that, I think somebody overpeaked into the matchup as well when we were hanging out in Tarek's stream for the watch party. So that was pretty funny to see. But I want to know, like, what's your thoughts so far on commentators commentating about players' decision making, and do you think casters such as ourselves are going a little bit too far from time to time as how we're criticizing these players' plays?
Well, it's obviously a big topic, but the players aren't the target audience. And I think that it is something you have to consider with esports is there is this strange feedback loop where if players get too much negative press, they risk losing their jobs. And so obviously they may fear that the public broadcast that everyone is listening to may have an impact on that. Likewise, the same is for casters, right? It's like if players who typically have very loyal fan bases are going to constantly criticize casters, then the caster is going to get really afraid of losing their job, and then they'll want to appease the players. So we get this weird feedback loop where I think people don't actually necessarily get to do exactly what it is they want to do because they're worried about what the other side is thinking. But I think for the most part is like there is this weird connection that's been made that needs to be disconnected with this idea that the point of a broadcast is to paint everything with sunshine and roses, and that the players are the target audience. They're not. Players aren't the target audience. Not even people at really super high elo are necessarily the target audience. Like, it's not necessarily always about, like, explaining at a crazy high level what is happening. That's obviously a great thing to have on a broadcast, but the point, first and foremost, is entertainment. And that is why in so many examples of commentary, in all sorts of commentary across the ages, you have harsh criticism. Even if it is not entirely right, it's about driving emotion in the viewer. And that's it. Look, as a player, if you're like worried about how you're doing, or if you like care about what's being said about what, just worry about your thing. If you win, then you prove them wrong. That's
Exactly.
it. Like just worry about your thing, and also the same kind of should be for casters to an extent. But I think that casters are probably a little bit more at risk of being attacked by loyal fan bases. But I just think that it gets so exhausting. Like, it's just sometimes a little bit like, all right, princess, like it's not actually really about you.
Well, even at that point too, I think you nail it on the head too. I think it's more about the community that pitchfork from whoever is their favorite follower, right? Because one thing that's good, at least for me as a caster, is that I'm actually not getting death threats. While players, when they lose their matches, they're getting death threats left and right from their fan base or even their fake fans. So that fucking sucks to see that in that aspect. But I think that right now, when you're looking at the state of just casters in general and how they criticize players, I don't think they're as harsh as some others may do, even in the professional scene. And we actually have a few examples for that, so let's have a look at them.
So coming off a worse week than Harvey Weinstein, and they're up by 14 points.
Only my LA guy comes up with that
Well,
one.
you know.
There you go.
It's dark days indeed, but this is a time for leaders to step up. And so to the supposed leaders, I will say this. All right, Tim Howard. Tim, the Belgium game ended 3 years ago. We need you to save the ball now. Jeff Cameron, clean it up or let's get someone who will. Clint Dempsey, yeah, you're a national team legend. Now we need you to be a national team leader. Michael Bradley, the U.S. does not need you to be Zen. The U.S. needs you to play better. Josie Altidore, is this really as good as it gets? Because it's still not good enough. Bruce Arena. Bruce, Jurgen Klinsmann lost at home to Mexico. You lost at home to Costa Rica. This is now all on you, not Jurgen. Oh, and by the way, to all the guys that I didn't mention it because you don't even warrant to mention. That includes you too, Wonder Boy. So, what are you guys going to do? Are you going to continue to be a bunch of soft, underperforming, tattooed millionaires? You are a soccer generation that has been given everything. You are a soccer generation who is on the verge of squandering everything. So, now it's time to pay it back. Make us believe again.
And you think that we're edgy when we say he should have peaked? Come on. I thought that was fucking harsh as fuck. And even I was cringing fucking listening to that. I'd be like, oh, fuck, man. I even asked production when we were doing preparing for the show. I was like, did this guy get fired after? But yeah, I think that even the way that we're currently doing things, it's not that bad in my opinion. But Tanner, I want to know your thoughts first.
Yeah, I think Gio, said it perfectly. Gio kind of hit the nail on the head for essentially what is happening on the broadcast and to who it's directed towards. I just wanted to add in that we don't, as casters, want to be hated. Obviously, we don't say these things for people to come at us or for the likes or for this. And so when a situation like this arises, obviously, like, give us some context, right? How many games are happening throughout the weekend? If you're unhappy with something, you are probably more than welcome to go to any caster and say, you know, what the heck did you mean by this, man? Because we don't get to explain ourselves in the moment. So put yourself in their shoes if you could, or think about how else that could have meant, because we're not trying to come at you as players or fans. And then also, a lot of the times, the casters are just having a conversation, right? That's where good casting comes from, is when they're not necessarily casting to the players or to the chat, but they're doing it to one another. And stuff like that comes up in conversation, right? How many times have somebody in the chat or even a player and like, wow, that guy's shit. You know, that happens all the time. So take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. The casters aren't doing it to piss people off or to get under people's skin. And yeah, again, don't just like blindly toss out to your followers to get everybody to go at people's necks. Like, have a conversation, man. If you're upset with something, like, especially somebody like Dapper, like, you can go to literally anybody on any desk anywhere, dude, and have that conversation and say, hey, man, you shouldn't do it like that, because they might have meant it a completely different way. Whatever it might have been could obviously be misinterpreted 1,000 different ways. So
yeah,
I just think the whole situation was handled poorly. Obviously, casters, our job isn't to just shit talk people. It's not what we're trying to do, but we are having a conversation. We are talking to one another.
Entertain too, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Entertainment.
And Scott was also bringing a good point as well in the chat as well, saying that you know, it depends who is also making the comments, because the one that we just saw too, the person that was very harsh on those players was also an ex-pro player as well within the European football scene, but of course American soccer player in this case. But you know what? I think for me, my recommendation for any type of like new casters when they're coming in is also, you know, we always have the hindsight of being able to see everything when we're casting as well. So try to keep in mind, put yourself in the shoes of that player as to why they're making that decision. And then maybe it'll give you a better idea as to be like, oh, I maybe understand why they're making that play, instead of just trying to just shit talk within the moment. If you don't want to be that type of like edgy type of like caster that wants to just shit on everybody too, because you could have that personality as well, and I'm not against that. But if you want to not get the pitchforks being thrown at you, then maybe that's one of the tips you could look into. So with that, at least that's going to end the rapid fire segment that we currently have for this show for Valoranting. We actually do have our interview segment coming up right after. It's going to be Anderson of Nearest Airport that's going to be joining us for the interview and also to talk about LCQ. So before we go to the break, of course, we want to give one final shout out to Twitch.tv. Without them, we actually can't get the show. Of course, we'll still be able to get the show because it's free for you to stream on Twitch.tv, and it's easy to do. All you got to do is turn on the stream, turn on your camera, and you're good to go. But at least this time, we got some moolah given by Twitch. So thank you, Twitch. We'll go for a break, and when we come back, we'll have a conversation with Anderson.